Right now, I'm going to show you how to paint mini watercolor landscapes, or Landscapitos as we call them in the Nature Journal Club. Landscape paintings will make you a better artist and nature journaler for 5 main reasons. Reason number 1, because it's smaller, you're gonna have to do a simpler drawing, and that's gonna force you to prioritize on what really matters in the landscape. When you do a bigger painting, you don't have that opportunity and you're not forced to prioritize, and you often end up including a lot of things that are not important. Reason number 2, because it is smaller, there's gonna be a lot less guesswork in your painting, whereas if you're doing a larger landscape painting, you're gonna end up filling in a lot of things from your imagination or guessing, and that ends up with less clarity, whereas in a Landscapito or mini watercolor painting, you get a lot more clarity and less guesswork. Reason number 3, because they are smaller, you're more likely to finish a painting than you are when you do a larger landscape that sometimes takes so long that you don't finish it and put in the details. Finishing landscape paintings allows you to learn so much more because you push them all the way through to the end, and you feel better when you actually finish something. Reason number 4, a mini landscape painting allows you to do multiple shots and get more angles and experiments because it takes you less time to finish one painting. Last but not least, when you do a mini painting or Landscapito, it leaves more time to do other things and leaves more space on your page to do other things such as sketch flying birds, make notes, or even write poems. Now that you know 5 reasons why mini watercolor landscapes are better, aka Landscapitos, are you ready to dive right in? Let's do this. Don't miss the special trick I have for you at the end. The first thing I'm going to do is just put in my frames. This creates the constraint that makes these mini watercolor landscapes so powerful. Oops, I got distracted a little bit here, drawing some birds that are flying by. The cool thing is the landscape's not going to go anywhere, but these birds I might only see for a moment. So I have some space there, but I'm going to start laying in my landscapes, and I'm using this gray pen, which I really love. It's the Fudayaku brush pen. It has gray on one side, black on the other. This gray works really well because the watercolor will mostly erase it actually. So I'm just getting my composition. I'm focusing on this cool arched rock that is coming up out of the ocean. And in my second little landscape, mini landscape drawing, I'm focusing in even closer. Having multiple perspectives, multiple views is one of the benefits of doing small landscape paintings. You can see here that I am putting in some of the darks right away. This means that I will know when I come in with my watercolor where my really dark darks are. Everything else is sort of just outline. There's some fog in this landscape, so I'll try not to draw that part in. I add a couple more birds here as they fly by, and it's always good to pay attention to those other things that are happening to the environment. And I decided I'm just going to add 2 more other landscapes, mini landscape paintings onto here because I can. That's one of the benefits of doing mini watercolor landscapes. I zoom out even further on this one so you can see the arched rock is smaller. I'm making all of those rocks really dark, and I'm just double checking my values, looking at it over and over again. Now that I've done this from 5 different perspectives, I decided to zoom in to the max and just focus on that arched rock. Each one of these can inform the other. That is the other, really powerful thing about doing multiple small landscape paintings. Each one will inform the others, and you'll learn so much more by doing it this way than by just spending all your time on one big landscape. Okay, it's time for watercolor. So I always start with the sky. I'm mixing up my blue because this is a seascape in this painting. I will use some of the same blue for the ocean. And I also often use the blue to paint into my furthest background layer. The blue gives the sense of atmospheric perspective for the distance. Since there is some fog in this one, I am leaving some sort of nebulous area for the fog. And I am doing the blue color on all of these little mini watercolor landscapes while I can, because I have the the color ready. So that's another benefit of doing these multiple ones. Right now I'm laying in another layer of blue for the places that I want darker. So that's going to be the ocean. The ocean should always be darker than the sky. Everything is darker than the sky. So just putting down another layer, even if it's the same blue, putting down a second wash will make that darker. I also will put down another layer of blue for some of these background elements. And in some of them, I'm doing an experiment where I just put the blue down on all of my layers. This one right here in the middle left, I'm trying to get that fog, so I've left a little bit of an area blank. In the bottom left, I'm also trying to get the illusion of fog. So one of the things that you can be doing when you're painting multiple mini watercolor landscapes or landscapitos at the same time is you can be testing different things. That is one of the ways that this can really accelerate your learning and one of the reasons why I like it so much. So you can see I'm coming back in here and fudging around with the fog and the sky a little bit in that top left one as well. An annoying fly came in and started bothering me. Now I'm going to my warm earth tones. So I'm trying to get this buff titanium color in on a lot of my rocks because it is the palest color on my rocks. So remember that you want to work from palest to darkest in watercolor. That is the usual approach. And usually the furthest background elements are paler, the sky is paler, and then the ground or the ocean that's pointing straight up towards the sky is the next palest, and then things that are vertical are going to be darker. So a lot of times cliffs will be dark, things like that. That's all, assuming there's not local colors or local shadows. But just kind of knowing those principles of what's darkest and what's lightest is really important. Another trick you can see right now, I'm putting in some purple. If you put a little bit of purple into your distant objects, a lot of times it just gives that illusion of distance. Even if you don't really see purple, I've found that just pretending like those distant hills are purple and putting purple on them often creates this really realistic look. Oh, time for some coconut water beverage. Okay, snack break is good to let the watercolor dry completely because we're about to go back in and darken all of our colors that need to be darkened, starting from the background and moving towards the foreground. And we're also going to adjust our colors. So I'm going in here and trying to get the little blue, green, green, blue ocean mix accurate. And so getting colors right is not as important as getting the values right. So make sure that if you're going in there and adjusting colors, that you're not messing up the value relationships, because the value relationships are more important than everything else. I'm putting in a little bit more of that purple blue into this hillside here to make that a little bit darker so that it's darker than the sky, and also so that fog shows up a little bit more. And I am going to use that same purple blue in the bottom left painting to get that furthest hillside and also some of the near ground, a little bit mid-ground stuff. Okay, now I'm cleaning my brush really well because I'm going from my blue and purple cool colors to my warm sort of earth tone colors. And I want my brush to be really clean before I pick up this buff titanium. This is the lightest color that I'm using for these rocks, but if I put down a second layer of it, it does make it still darker. And I probably only want to have sort of 3 stages of value. Really light, slightly darker, and then darkest. And if I make it too many more variations of value than that, it makes the painting overly complex. So especially with these mini watercolor paintings, mini watercolor landscapes or landscapitos, you want to keep the value relationships pretty simple. And usually the foreground elements are going to be darker, warmer, and more saturated than those further background elements. So even my land elements in the background are sort of that blue color to give that illusion of depth. I keep my little paper towel down here so that I can clean, because every once in a while I do need to switch back to the blue. In this case, you can see that I mixed a little bit of green into my blue because I liked how that worked in the middle left painting, and it is a more accurate representation of the color match for the ocean. So I'm going back and adding that, and I'm just being really careful that I don't touch any of those light buff titanium areas that I just put in. to cause bleeding. But that is one of the benefits of having multiple paintings going at the same time, is you can sort of jump around and allow things to dry. Ideally, I probably would have tried to get this darkness of the ocean, the correct darkness, in fewer steps, but you can always keep making something darker with watercolor. What you can't do is make it lighter. So it's okay that I'm building it up in several layers, and with more practice, you'll be able to match the values more quickly. So I just continued that same process of adjusting and darkening my watercolor on those mini watercolor landscapes, and got the ocean colors matched up where I wanted them to be for these Landscapitos. And I think that the ocean is done. I'm done with my blue, and I can move on to finishing these mini watercolor landscapes. Whether you're doing full-size watercolor landscapes or you're doing mini watercolor landscapes, there's a huge benefit to keeping a simplified palette. However, I decided I'm going to go past the just blues and earth tones, and I am going to add a little bit of green. There is some vegetation, but be careful with green because your eye's going to adjust. You're going to see that the distant hill is green, and you might want to add a little bit of green onto that like I just did right there. But these actually will look so much more realistic if you just keep them that blue or purple color so they look like a distant object, because that will give the illusion of depth. If you start putting green and local colors on everything or adding in these details and stuff like that, it can mess up the simple beauty of the mini landscape painting. I'm just going to add a few. There's some ice plant growing on these cliffs. I want some saturated colors a little bit in the foreground, especially to make that foreground pop. But for the most part, I'm just doing a few final adjustments here with my local colors before moving on to the final step of painting these mini watercolor landscapes. A lot of times, watercolor beginners, nature journaling beginners mess up this step. This step can be really scary, but it's also really important, and it's going to make your watercolor paintings, whether they're mini watercolor landscapes or full-size paintings, it's going to make them so much better. So what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to get your darkest colors. They could be of any color, but the main thing is the value, and start putting in those dark shadows. So look again at your subject, look at your landscape. Where are those really dark darks, and just push them. This is something I definitely did not do in my early watercolor landscapes, and it really stands out. They kind of turn up to be these anemic watercolors. So right now I'm pushing the values, especially these shadows, these cast shadows on the rock are some of the darkest aspects in my landscape. So look carefully at your landscape and go in and add those darks. You might get tempted to add a ton of detail or get too calligraphic or into a more of a drawing state during this part, but be careful with that. Don't get too many details, especially in further away parts of the painting. Take one last look at your painting from a distance. Look at what you're painting from in real life and try to touch up these last few dark values. Pushing these dark values is going to make your paintings much more powerful, even if they're small mini paintings. Speaking of pushing your values, there's only one way to get lighter values in watercolor, unless you're reserving the whites. Reserving the whites of the paper is obviously the best. That's what I did with the fog. But right now, I'm going to use one of the opaque white tools that I have in my toolkit, and it's this Jumbo Presto correction pin. It's actually white out, but it works better than any of the other tools that I have tried. It works better than just plain gouache. I do clean the tip off a little bit and test it on a separate piece of paper before I dive into my painting with it. None of these opaque white solutions for watercolor are very sexy or very subtle, but they can get the job done, especially in this situation where you have to paint narrow white lines on top of really dark things. Getting that contrast is the most important. The actual polished look is not possible. If you look up close, this jumbo correction pin leaves kind of a weird texture, but for these kind of ocean landscapes or seascapes, I use it all the time, and you can get that white water in. I also use it for waterfalls. Sometimes you can use it for reflections on animals' eyes, things like that. But one of my favorite things to do is to paint it this way. I've tried reserving the whites to get the whitewater look in the ocean and the waves, but it's really challenging. So this is my secret trick that I wanted to share with you. I highly recommend having one of these jumbo correction pins in your kit. I like it better than any of the other white tools that I have tried, and it is fun to use, but you can definitely overdo it. Painting in the white water around the rocks is really fun. It's at the end of your painting though, so you have to be careful because you could really mess everything else up when you do this. So don't overdo it with the white jumbo correction pin. I hope you learned something from this video, and if you're like me and you think that nature journaling can help make the world a better place, then support me on Patreon. Click right here and you can go over to my Patreon page and see how you can support me and my mission to make the world a better place through nature journaling. And you can support me for as little as $5 a month. It makes a big difference. I'm doing this full time. I'm trying to make the world a better place, and my vision is that nature journaling can not only unlock the creativity inside of us, but it can also help us save nature, which is in dire need right now. So go over there to my Patreon, check it out. It's really easy. You can get special content, but most importantly, you can help support me on this mission to make the world a better place through art and nature journaling. See you next week. Bye.